Welcome to the brand new Mission Critical podcast.
My name is Cassidy, and I'm here to help introduce episode 3 of my dad's first series,
5 Reasons We Are Going Nowhere.
Today we are presenting the Folly of Giving, where Dad looks critically at how we donate money. This episode was recorded on July 4th, 2021. Thank you, and have a great day.
Now, giving is something that we all should be involved in. As Christians, we should be giving of our talents, our knowledge, our relationships, and yes, our money as well. $57 billion is given every year to Christian mission. Now, that's all types of giving to Christian mission, $57 billion. Sounds like a big number, but let's put that in perspective. Pet care worldwide is worth $230 billion every single year. Pet care, $230 billion. So although $57 billion is a big number, it's really not when you consider what we're trying to do with it. So we need to look at how to use it best. So today's talk, we're looking not so much at how do we get more money into mission and outreach and changing the world. We're talking about how do we more intelligently give. So I'm going to bring up 6 or 7 points here. These are like hooks that you can sort of hang some of your thinking on, and they're meant to provoke you to go and consider your own giving strategy. If you're just giving as a knee-jerk reaction and not thinking about it, you are probably not being a good steward of the money God has entrusted to you. So let's look at a few of these items. First of all, one of the problems I call the problem of visible, giving to the visible. Most people, because of human nature, respond emotionally to what they see. So if they see a child who is hungry, they want to feed the child. That's very natural. Nothing wrong with that. But most problems have a root issue behind it. And if we don't understand the root issue, and if we don't invest in a solution at the root issue, the problem just comes back. So we may feel good in the short term, but in the long term, we're not doing much that is sustainable. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the invisible problem behind the initial problem that got my attention? And that will force you to start digging a little bit. If you make a small adjustment in your giving decisions to focus more on the invisible problem that is behind the visible problem that first got your attention, we will right there begin to make a bigger difference in the world. You don't have to give $1 more, you just have to invest it more effectively and more wisely. Now that leads us to my second point here, what I call immediate gratification. Again, a human nature thing. We all love getting instant feedback, instant gratification. We all love quick results. That tends to drive us to look for things that are going to have that very, very quick feedback loop. But if we are focusing on the invisible problem, often the solution is also invisible. The solution isn't immediately fed back to us. We can't see it right away. That doesn't mean that your money isn't going to very good use, but it means that you're going to have to wait a while. And in some cases, you will never see the ultimate result that you're looking for. So you need to follow up. Your accountability process with the money that you're investing needs to be more about the steps. And you need to understand the strategy more. What is happening with your money that is working on an invisible problem that in due time, at the right season, produces a visible solution. Okay? So adjust your focus on visible problems and start looking at the invisible problem behind it. And second, just be honest with yourself. We as human beings want immediate gratification. That's not wrong, but it does lead to less than efficient use of your money when you're giving to projects. Next point I want to make is what I call washing my hands of my money. Now, you probably haven't thought of this one in the past, but it has to do with the idea that, in a sense, it comes from lazy thinking. You know you should give, and you feel guilty perhaps if you don't give. So you decide, I'm going to give, I'm going to write a check, I'm going to get online and transfer some money to a project. And when you've done that, there's very little thinking in advance and there's very little thinking after. You simply do it and say to yourself, there, I've done it. A lot of people do that, and especially when you come to the end of the year, if you're living in a country that offers tax receipts, you sort of want to get that money out so that you're going to get your tax receipt. And you don't do a whole lot of thinking about it. You wash your hands of it and say, I've done my duty. You feel like a statistic, and you seem to be okay with it. If that's you, you need to stop and think, if I'm not ready to give and actually be invested in this in a real way, then maybe it's better not to give. Maybe it's better to keep my money until I'm ready to invest it in a way that makes me a good steward of that. Now, as we go through these points, one of my goals is to provoke you enough, is to step on a few people's toes. So if I'm not stepping on your toes, I'm not doing my job. I'm hoping that I'm making you a little bit uncomfortable here. As you're thinking about your own giving patterns, you're thinking, wow, I never knew that I should be asking these questions. So I don't apologize for that. Think about where I'm stepping on your toes, and that is probably where you need to focus your attention and take some action. Let's look at the next point here, what I call big money, big chunks, and big waste. People that have a little bit more to give maybe than the average person, they tend to be people that God has gifted with the ability to make money, and so they have more to give. But those people are also busy, and they don't have the time to invest small chunks of money in the best places, the places that can produce the best results. So they tend to give a big chunk of money away to bigger organizations. And their thinking goes like this. I'm busy. I can't split up my money, so organization X, everybody knows, they're professionals, they're probably safe. So you give it there, and then you feel okay. You feel like you've done your due diligence, but really, all you've done is download it to an organization that appears safe. Let me suggest, though, that many of the larger organizations that are happy to take your money are safe, but mediocre. If you are satisfied with giving in a mediocre way, then that's fine. Keep doing that. Now, what do you do about that? If you don't want to give in a mediocre way, how do you, as a busy person with a larger amount of money, think through how to give it? I would suggest that you use middle people, and I don't mean middle organizations. I don't like the idea of money going to a foundation that then go through a whole set of rigid policies for how to give your money away to somebody else. But I prefer to work with what we could call relationship brokers or champions or connectors. People that make it their business, probably naturally because they're networkers, they make it their business to know who's out there, who's doing a great job, and who needs money for their projects. And then they can help you and connect you to those projects. So you can use middle people like that. There's also some systems and some web programs that are being developed around the world to help people give their money more effectively. We're also working on one of those called Assembli, and that will be available sometime next year. So the big money, big chunks, big waste. Think about that. Do you fit into that category? Consider using a middle person to help you manage that money more effectively. Next point is about short cycles. Short cycles can be things like the year. So the calendar year forces you into a cycle. Why? Because of maybe your tax year, maybe because of tax receipts at the end of the year, maybe because of the annual reports you need to file, maybe there's quarterly reports, whatever the cycle is that you're sort of trapped into when some of your dividends or some of your investments come due. These are cycles. And usually the cycles that the donor has to live with are shorter than the cycles, the strategic cycles of the project you're giving to. So if you make a decision 1 year on a 1-year cycle and say, I'll give to that project, but they're on a 5-year cycle, a 5-year strategy, and then the next year you say, okay, I'm going to give to somewhere else. It's very difficult for those projects who really want to get to the problem behind the problem and want to deal with the root level of issues. And that takes time, that takes more time than the short cycles. Those people need to know that they can sustain their projects over the duration of the strategy. So short cycles tend to be they tend to drive, I think they tend to create poor strategy, because the project leaders on their side will look at the donors and say, okay, I don't want to lose them, so I'm going to change my strategy. I'm going to adapt my strategy to the cycle of the donor. That usually means pushing the strategy or the objective up into the visible and out of the invisible treatment of the problem. That means that project is no longer as sustainable, because we're not dealing with the root level issue, and the problem will keep coming back. So the project leaders push the project up to the visible area so that the donor can see it, get excited, give money, and then get a report about it back before the end of their cycle, so they can report to their partners or their shareholders or to their family, whoever they need to report to. And this can happen with churches as well. Churches give on an annual basis often, and want to report what's going on with the money. This whole short cycle reality that is happening in the world is actually one of the things that is driving very poor strategy missionally, and that's a problem with giving. What I would suggest, if you're caught in one of these cycles, and that's sort of the reality of your kind of business or your kind of work, is to determine to combine 3 cycles together. So when you make a decision 1 year, it's really carries through over 3 years. So if you focus on a project, find one that meets the criteria you're looking for, find one that has a focus on the invisible problems behind the visible problems, and then make a commitment more than 1 cycle. So tell the project, if all goes well and God willing, we will support this project for the next 3 years, so that they can start making some long-range planning. Forcing projects and leaders around the world into short-range planning is not doing any justice for the projects, and works against the grander strategies of changing the world. So do your part. Combine 3 cycles together. Brings us to the next point. There's a tendency, again, a lot of this comes out of who we are as humans, and we just have to name it and make a commitment to address it. There's an allure naturally that we have to look at a product. It's usually touchable. It has to do with the senses. It's visible. You can touch, taste, smell, hear, see something. But when it comes to a process, the process is the steps, often more invisible than the product. The steps towards something, especially if you're dealing with a systemic change. And most big problems in the world have deep, interconnected, systemic reasons and solutions. But our tendency is to look at the product and not the process. Intelligent investors, intelligent social and missional investors, need to start thinking about funding process and not just product. It's a funny thing here because over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a big move toward accountability. There's been a big move toward being able to measure outcomes. And it all has to do with being a better steward. So I get that. We all want to see that our money is actually doing something. And I'm not saying we shouldn't want that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have mechanisms to do that. But as we've tried to do that over the last few years, we've had this unintended consequence. It's moved us toward projects, toward causes that are easy to measure and that have well-defined products. But in the process of doing that, it's undermined the processes that are really ultimately incredibly strategic toward making progress in the systemic area. How do all the pieces fit together? How do all the pieces of this problem need to be designed and aligned so that we can get to a sustainable solution? If we built the space shuttle and just paid for the window on it because we can see it, and didn't pay for the engineers that had to do decades of drawing and planning and scientific research, we would never have had the space shuttle built. In the mission world and in social world and in the spiritual challenges and the discipleship challenges that we face, there are a tremendous amount of underlying needs that are maybe not very visible. They drive toward a product, but they often get neglected. So as investors, I'm challenging you to start to look at investing in the process. Those of you who are business people understand this. You know what it takes to set up a business and the steps and the years sometimes of planning. You know, if you want to open a restaurant, you don't just rent a place and open it next weekend. There's a lot of planning, training, buying equipment, getting supply chains ready, and so forth. Don't abandon your business experience when you start to invest in mission. Use the same business acumen to understand that all the steps in the process, in a missional process, need to be funded. All right? Let's look at the last point I have here, and this is called risk aversion. Especially corporate funders, those are the foundations and sometimes the big companies, the people who actually put more professional work, and they may even have hired people to specifically help them give their money away. There's, again, that's a good thing, but it also has an unintended consequence in that the more you plan and the more strategic you are in your giving, there's a tendency to have less risk aversion. More risk aversion. We want to avoid risk. We think now we can control the process, we understand everything, so we're going to make the risk less. And what that means is that we start to invest in a narrower and narrower type of project, one that we can predict an outcome for. And that also does a disservice. That's like at my previous point, investing in a product that's easy to define rather than a process that often involves risk. It involves innovation. It involves some trial and error. I would suggest that one way to handle that is to always make sure that whatever project you're looking at, you're able to meet face to face with the key people behind it, with the visionaries behind it. You don't have to always meet face to face, but make sure that you're able to if you want to. Here's why I say that. What you get on paper, you get a proposal on paper. It's been well thought out. It's written, and many of them you will reject because they don't check off your boxes. And so it's almost like it's mechanical. It's a computer making decisions for you. I've traveled around the world, driving in many, many countries. And back when I was a teenager and in my 20s, if you were stopped by the police in Canada on the road, they would chase you down. They'd put their lights on and they would stop you on the road, and they would come up and say, ask for your license. And then you'd say, "What's wrong, officer?" And he would say, "Well, you were going a little too fast." And then we'd have this conversation, and once in a while they would get out their book and they'd write you a ticket, a fine. And other times they would have a little conversation, and they would say, "It looks like on your record here, you've only had one in the last 5 years. I'm going to let you go this time, but please lower your speed." And that's how it used to happen. Now, I've traveled in England where there aren't any kind of chases like that. If you go through a certain zone, there's cameras, and they're not going to have a negotiation with you. A computer tells the camera, "Take a picture," and if your speed is above a certain speed, you get something in the mail. There's no talk, there's no discussion, there's no human element. It's efficient, but it's very, very impersonal. So think of giving in this way. If you simply have a system that's so rigid that you automatically eliminate certain things and never give a face-to-face chance to actually talk to people and hear their heart. And once in a while, you're going to look at a project and say, it breaks most of my rules, but there's something right about this. I'm willing to take a risk in this because God is leading me to get behind this person, even though they still have a lot to figure out. All right? So let's deal with the risk aversion that we naturally have by make a commitment not to eliminate the human element and the face-to-face element from your decisions. So I want to end off today with just a little tool, a little suggestion of how you might be able to structure your giving decisions. Very simple little giving grid here. I've broken it up into 4 sections of 25% each. So if you have a sum of money that you give every year, I would suggest that you give the first 25% to friends and family. And by that I don't mean relatives necessarily, but people in your church, people in your community, people you have relationship with. Give it to those people who are engaged in some mission or outreach or worthwhile project. Now, they may not fit your chosen theme, but you support them because they're part of your community. Okay? So just do it. Your cousin comes to you and says, "I'm going to do some work in Ghana." You support them. Unless you think they're totally crazy, you support them. You get behind them, okay? Give the next 25% to worthwhile projects that are ongoing. So I call that the maintenance category. Now, a lot of people tend to give almost 100% to the maintenance category because it's predictable, because they can already see what's going on, because there's very little risk involved in it. Some people give nothing to it because they only want to give one time to different projects. But the reality is that things do need to be maintained over time, especially if the project is focusing on deep-rooted systemic change that's going to take 5 or 10 years to accomplish. They need to know that there are missional investors behind them to go for the long haul. So give 25% of your money to maintenance. The third 25%, give to catalytic leaders. We all know leadership is important, but we often have trouble giving to leaders, especially to catalytic leaders, because catalytic leaders are often, usually, not the visible, charismatic people that you see at the top of a project or an organization. They might be, but often they are not. They are the people behind the scenes that see the big picture and are creating the relationships, are bringing resources and partners and stakeholders together to the point of creating the critical mass that is needed for breakthrough in a community, in a nation, or in some big worldwide problem or issue. Catalytic leaders often have a very difficult time defining what they're doing, but they play an absolutely essential role in mission, and they are underfunded. Catalytic leaders are often the people that are leading networks and partnerships. Some of those networks and partnerships are useless. They're very poorly organized. But more and more, we as a Christian community are learning and figuring out how to do partnering better and better. Get behind those leaders who have a vision for collaboration. Support them with 25% of your money. The last 25%, start something new. Don't do the same old thing. Start something new every year with 25% of your money. Get behind an innovation. Get behind a new idea. Get behind a startup. All right? So if you take your money, divide it up into those four categories, you're going to, right there, start to invest much more effectively. Now, you can change the percentages around to 20, 30, something else. You can add another category if it's important to you. That's fine. The point is, be intentional about having a giving strategy. Whether you're a grandmother or a business owner or a doctor or a church, be intentional about how you give, and consider these 7 points as discussion starters in your mind or with your team. Thank you.